A race between the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroad companies led to the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, approved by Abraham Lincoln in 1862. This great achievement in American history was over 2,000 miles long and took 6 years to complete. People from all over the nation and from other countries helped build it, causing the invention of time zones. Running through the Wild West, the railroad brought up towns and western migration. The Great Plains, conquered by steel and steam. June 1862. The Transcontinental Railroad is but a mere vision and will change America in the years to come. A monumental success that will connect the American coasts. A 6-month voyage over the continent will shorten to 6 days. Towns could rise and migration to the west will skyrocket. However, no success is without barriers. These American pioneers have to cross the Great American Desert, the Great Plains. Before them lay the vast prairies and mountains. The wildlife is no easier to tackle. 1 ton of sheer brute force, yet a gentle grazer, the American bison. Their stampedes reach 30 miles an hour, and they can jump 6 feet high. Beyond the bison herds are the villages of 1,000 teepees, Native Americans. Yet before the railroad workers can handle them, they must learn not to kill each other. Among the many physical obstacles that await these pioneers, the mountain ranges are the trickiest. The Sierra Nevada. These mountains date back to the Mesozoic, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and now they stand at nearly 15,000 feet, almost 3 miles high. Chinese workers doomed to work on the most dangerous tasks, like the fuse of the rocks coated in nitroglycerin, stronger than gunpowder. The explosive is extremely unstable, and for many Chinese workers, it would be the last thing they ever see. The Central Pacific Railroad Company identified a path going through the Donner Pass to cross the Sierra Nevadas, but to get the railroad past them, dozens of tunnels were blown into the mountains. Poor conditions and close quarters led to the spread of disease, while lax safety rules and environmental conditions further contributed to worker deaths. Ultimately, an estimated 1,200 workers died during the construction of the first Transcontinental Railroad, a rate of 80 deaths for every 1,000 workers, one of the highest death rates for a construction project in the modern era. 28,000 spikes and 3,500 rails are hammered in every day, and once through the mountains, the Central Pacific crews speed up to laying down almost 6 miles of track daily. Their record? 10 miles in a single day. Meanwhile, the Union Pacific workers are beginning their journey across the Great Plains. 70 years later, on the same ground, Black Sunday and the largest dust storm in history will take place, killing 17 people. For now, these workers must deal with the threat of the natives. Not only have they lived on the Great Plains for over 200 years, they are now pressed to move under reservations as to not disrupt the American people. They also move to make way for the Union and Central Pacific's overland route, spanning across the continental United States, the Pacific Railroad. Section 2. And be it further enacted, the right, power, and authority is hereby given to said company to take from the public lands adjacent to the line of said road, earth, stone, timber, and other materials for the construction thereof. The United States shall extinguish as rapidly as may be the Indian titles to all lands falling under the operation of this act, and required for the said right of way and grants hereinafter made. The Pacific Railroad Act, July 1st, 1862. Americans wanted the Native Americans to move. The government shared that same opinion. This was early nativism in the U.S. and preceded the abolition of slavery by just 3 years. With most of their land already taken, Native Americans witnessed the railroad stripping the plains of its natural resources. Hunts came out with less food and clothing. This was colonial imperialism. Francis Palmer's famous painting, Across the Continent, depicts exactly how Native Americans were ignored, with smoke from this train about to block them out. Even homestead farmers were given lands that the natives were forced to vacate. Their way of life is obscured as a new era of technology races through the continent. To keep their independence and culture, natives had to go anti-imperialist. They had to become rebels. Whenever railroad construction passed through an indigenous village, tribes got into fights with the workers. They couldn't even legally settle the issue as they did not have written rights to the land in the first place. Machinery and railroad tracks were destroyed. Cattle were stolen, and workers were assaulted. The native tribes' mission to regain their lifestyle ultimately failed. Territory was lost, and the Transcontinental Railroad replaced the tribes with towns and American culture. One famous stand between the Americans and natives was the battle at Sand Creek. Invited by the U.S. Army, a few Cheyenne people were looking for a peaceful place to rest. Instead, they were brutally attacked, mutilated, and some of their body parts were cut as rewards. It didn't matter to the American people. To them, natives were one thing and one thing only: savages. This stereotype was amplified when 1,000 Sioux warriors tore apart a Colorado town, burning it to the ground. Several tribes, such as the Pawnee, allied with the U.S. Army, leading protection battalions against the Sioux. In addition to Native Americans, construction was halted by droughts, diseases, and even the rise of locusts, grasshopper-like insects capable of destroying farms. A project as massive as the Transcontinental Railroad required a hefty amount of manpower. This came from thousands of Chinese immigrants looking for anything but the life they just departed from. The Chinese workers on the railroad were hardworking. They laid down explosives and nitroglycerin. They persevered through avalanches. They braved the danger of the Wild West to make an honest living. Yet, they came home to some of the worst treatment and evil racism that plagued the United States. Hate crimes such as lynching and plunder were committed. Even a new racial slur was invented. The phrase, "a Chinaman's chance," referenced the Chinese workers as lesser chances of survival and prosperity. Because they often worked for lower wages than their white counterparts, the Chinese increasingly became the subjects of violence from an underemployed white working class in California. Even fellow workers let the Chinese light the nitroglycerin, work for lower pay, and for back-breaking hours. They were often referred to as America's other slaves. The Transcontinental Railroad. It brought peace, it brought hardships. It was built on success, and it was built on barriers. That railroad transformed the nation in the midst of civil war, and on May 10, 1869, a golden spike was driven into the grounds of Utah, marking the end of the labor. However, when you reach the end of the line, there's always another track on the opposite side, and those tracks are made of steel.